third year of the tariff. I would caution you, though, that the big difference is the deferral cycle at this juncture has never been longer. So you can only put off your tires going into winter on the heels of finally a harsh winter so long.
Got it. Okay, thanks, guys. Good luck.
Thank you.
And that is all the time we have for questions today. Mr. Van Heel, I'd like to turn the call back over to you for any additional remarks, sir.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time this morning. While we're disappointed with our recent sales trends, we're actively managing our business to drive top-line growth and earnings and look forward to having better numbers to discuss with you in January. In this operating environment, we're taking advantage of the natural hedges in our business model and competitive advantages to strengthen Monroe for the long term. We appreciate your continued support and the efforts of our employees that work hard to take care of our customers every day. Thanks again, and have a great day.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, that does conclude today's conference, and I'd like to again thank everyone for joining us.